All right, Mono Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening. Welcome to another episode of the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Welcome to it. My name is Sihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. Just give me a moment, folks, as I just change up and put these on, which will improve the quality of the sound. Maybe whilst I'm doing that, remember your only price of admission here at the BDL show is to hit that like button. Please do it now. Just hit that like button, especially as the numbers are streaming through. We're going to talk about something tonight which perhaps hasn't been, all too publicized in the South African media. And when there are stories of it, the stories tend to be rather biased and don't present all sides of this particular tale, as a geopolitical storm is brewing out in, as my camera slowly turns the other way. Just give me a moment, people. Let me sort this out. A geopolitical storm literally brews out in the eastern Europe, pardon me, in Ukraine. So we're going to have that conversation tonight as soon as my camera behaves. There we go, I think. We're going to have that conversation tonight and bring in multiple perspectives on this one. No, come on, this is unacceptable. Sorry, folks, give me a second here as I fix this. Oh, goodness gracious. There we go. And hold. There we go. As one Caesar Milan usually says, don't argue with it, don't reason with it, dominate it. There you go. All right, we are square. We're going to have that conversation tonight, and we've brought in a veritable mix of voices, really, who I'm hoping are going to debate this issue. We'll first set out what exactly it is that is happening in the Ukraine. Why is Joe Biden, the US president, so keen on ratcheting up tensions in that part of the world? Is one Vladimir Putin innocent in all of this? As we hear that there are a Russian contingent amassing on the border between his country and, of course, Ukraine. Is war imminent? Are we seeing a possibility of the outbreak of a quote-unquote World War III? Or is this entire thing a attempt to dribble and distract by Joe Biden, who faces a myriad of massive issues and domestic pressures, really, on US soil, on a political front? That is a president who's had a really bloody nose of a week, or month, I should say, in terms of the stymieing of his various domestic agendas. Is this an attempt to then dribble and distract? So we're going to have that conversation and get many perspectives, guys. I will watch the comments. This show is only 35 minutes long, so brace yourself. It will go by relatively quickly, but I have the kinds of people who inject knowledge into this conversation and a sound debate. Speaking about those people, let me bring them on, one of whom, by the way, is in the United States. I just spoke to him earlier on. If you do catch him a bit flustered, he is on the road off to a press conference at the moment. I'm talking about retired colonel from the US military, a chap who now has his own show, fantastic show. I'm talking about Chris Wyatt, of course. There he is on screen. Chris, good morning in your case, good evening in ours. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Can you hear me okay? Because I went to the speaker, not my mic. Okay, good. Just double checking because I have the Bluetooth on, but as long as you can hear me, fine. Yeah, I'm doing fine. Thanks for the nice comments here about my channel, my content. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm on the road, headed down for Major League Rugby season starts next weekend, and the DC club is having a press day for journalists, so I'm going down to cover that en route. And I've stopped in Maryland. You know, very quickly, not to eat up a lot of your time, but we have sovereign states, and each state has different rules. So Pennsylvania, where I live, no mask requirement because they have common sense now. Virginia, where I'm headed, no mask requirement, but I didn't quite get to a Starbucks in Virginia. So I'm trapped in Maryland, which 2 weeks ago re-implemented mask requirements. So I'm sitting in my car, sitting in my car instead of a Starbucks on my mobile.
Shout out to you, Chris, and thank you for making the effort. That is, of course, Chris Wyatt, all the way out in Maryland at the moment. Shout out to him. Another familiar face, just as bearded as Chris. Actually, no, not quite there, but on his way there is Gabriel Crouse from the Institute of Race Relations. There he is, of course. Gabriel, good evening. Welcome to the PDL show.
No, Celia, you mustn't compare beards now. It's it's doing me no favors. But how's it to you, and how's it to the Colonel? How's it, Chris?
Excellent. There is Gabriel Crouse, of course, from Institute of Race Relations. He heads up their campaigns in that part of the world. Shout out to Gabriel for joining us tonight. He has been chomping at the bits to have this conversation. Glad to facilitate it tonight. Last but not least is Hugo Kruger. There he is. Hugo, good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for having me all the way here from France, from Napoleon's country, and hopefully Russia doesn't end in our capital again.
I was about to say, hey man, them Frenchies better do more than throw French fries this time. Y'all better fight in this war. But anyway, guys, let's get straight into it because again, we don't have much time, and there's three broad areas really that I want us to cover. The first being what is going on in this. Chris, I'm going to give you the first bite of this particular cherry, because I know you're going to posit a very strong opinion on this one, but please set the scene for us. Just before we get into views and opinions, set the scene for us. What's going on? Why is there ratcheting up of tension between the US and Russia over Ukraine, a corrupt arsehole end of the country in the middle of nowhere in Eastern Bloc? Chris, have we lost you? Okay, looks like we've lost Chris for a moment.
The KGB just cut him off there.
Yeah, I was about to say. Putin was like, what? He's asking questions of the American first? Switch off. That was a terrible Russian accent. But Gabriel, let me come to you then. Same question, dude. What's going on here? Set the scene for us very briefly before we enter into particular positions.
Okay, so the immediate tension is over the Donbass, which is the eastern border region of Ukraine, bordering on Russia. It has sort of not been under Ukrainian government for 7 years, since 2014, when there was a coup in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, and a referendum in Crimea after the coup to say, look, you guys are not a legitimate government. We want to join Russia. People in the eastern borderlands, the Donbass, Luhansk, Donetsk, they said, we also don't want to be part of Ukraine because we don't respect the legitimacy of this government. We'd rather join Russia. And there's been fighting around that ever since. The fighting has been very intense at times. Over 13,000 people are said to have died in the Ukrainian civil war or conflict or secessionist movement or whatever you want to call it, according to the UN. But over the last few years, it has most often been a stalemate with very little going on, occupied zones, buffer zones, and then the other side of the army. Things have changed now in large measure immediately because there's sort of estimated 100,000 Russian troops on their border. And at the same time, NATO has reinforced the Ukrainian army. America sent in approximately 100 tons of armaments. The Brits have sent in anti-tank missiles. And reinforcements have been sent to NATO countries that border on Ukraine. So there's a lot of marching around happening. There's also a lot of naval exercises taking place around the world, really, with various forces basically puffing out their chests and saying, this is what we can do if you're not careful. And that's making people very worried about whether this is going to break out into all-out war. And if not, how could anyone possibly step back, given they've got their chest already so puffed out? That's it. CP, over to you.
And yeah, sorry, as I bring myself back on screen there, apologies for that little interruption if you heard it. A neighbor just came through. But again, you've set the scene out quite nicely here. And I see Chris is back in the waiting room here. Let me just bring him back on screen. He would have missed, of course, that little intro. As again, Chris, we're just at the point of setting out the what is. People haven't really put their positions out yet. But let me actually give you that opportunity again, because I did begin by saying, because I do want that slight American perspective to an extent on so far as the what is, before we go into the actual geopolitics of this all. Chris, what's brought us to this point where we're seeing a ratcheting up of tension between the US and Russia over, as I said earlier on, really a non-entity of a country in the grand scheme of things? Why is it that we're seeing a emphasis by the Biden administration over the borders between the Ukraine and Russia, when arguably he doesn't give a flying fudge about your own borders between other countries that actually border America over there?
Yeah, well, I'm sorry about that. I don't know if YouTube or my mobile provider decided to shut me down, but my phone just shut off. I've never experienced that, particularly with this particular phone. Anyway, so there's actually a phone store, but I was going to walk in, but I got it to reboot. Anyway, I didn't catch all Gabriel had to say, so I apologize. I repeat, it's a long story, but the bottom line is that a lot of facts are being distorted and misrepresented to explain what's happening and not happening with Russia and the near abroad, particularly in Ukraine. And frankly, this is the tail wagging the dog sort of thing from my perspective, and I can go at great depth on that, but we don't have that kind of time. Bottom line is that Joe Biden is simply lying to the public. The largest invasion since World War II. Okay, Joe, I was in the largest invasion since World War II in 1991 when we invaded Kuwait and Iraq to send Saddam Hussein back. 580,000 troops crossed the line of departure. That's far larger than 127,000 troops around Ukraine right now. So his math skills are those of a 3-year-old. Let's start with that. The second thing is that was eclipsed by again, that figure of 127,000 in 2003, when 250,000 U.S. and allied troops went into Iraq in 2003. So it's hyperbole. It's a tail wagging the dog. Russia is definitely a threat, but even NATO is not united. As France and Germany don't want to be part of this because they're cowards. No, because they don't have any gas. I'm just kidding. No, France has got nuclear power. So, but Germany, it's a tail wagging the dog. There's so many things we talk about here and tear apart every argument. Biden says he has to go in to protect Americans, but we're not going into the Ukraine. We're being aggressive and threatening Russia by sending troops into the Baltic states and Poland, acting as if that's some sort of deterrence to them to do something in the Ukraine. And at the same time, he's told Americans that they're on their own. Jen Circleback Psaki says, if you're an American in Ukraine, we're not evacuating you. You're on your own. Only our embassy people are being taken out. Meanwhile, we've got a fleet of C-17 Starlifters sitting at Ramstein Air Base within a few hours distance to carry hundreds of people at a time. The same thing that people glommed onto and fell off of in Afghanistan to escape can fly from Ramstein to Kiev and evacuate every American in a matter of days. So it's just nonsense. And here's the thing, and I'll stop here. This saber rattling is not with Georgia. It's not with South Africa. It's not with Iraq. It's with a nuclear armed power that has over 10,000 warheads on intercontinental ballistic missiles aimed at our country. I'm waiting for the moment to watch a mushroom cloud go up here. I'm being a little hyperbolic right now, but seriously, in the end, it's probably going to be some face-saving nonsense. Oh, we'll agree not to let the Ukraine join NATO for 10 years, and we'll take 3,000 troops out of Estonia, and that'll be it. But there's a lot more to it, but it's all BS. That's my view.
Again, you've laid out the point here that I think I saw some heads nodding here in this. Hugo, I'm going to come to you because I do want you to then set the cat amongst the pigeon. Having heard these two perspectives,
I just want to add a little bit. Gabriel summed up a little bit nicely, but there's a historical context as well. Look, I think this is just a geopolitical battle. It's geopolitical flashpoint, right? But it is exaggerated and blown out of proportion, in my view. The second thing is, I agree with Chris. Look, NATO, and particularly France, is not going to allow the Ukraine to join NATO. France is not going to allow the Ukraine to join NATO because France is the strongest military might on the European continent. It means it will reallocate a great percentage of its military budget. So I want to go back to 2014. There was a coup d'etat. There's talks that the US instigated it. Whatever the case might be, the Ukrainian government came to power. Ukraine is a highly divided society, half Russian, half Ukrainian. It's a very tribal society. There's a long history of people pointing fingers at each other. As Gabriel said, the Donbas region is highly in dispute, the borders bordering Russia, because there's a Russian minority. But there is a diplomatic settlement that has already been agreed about in 2015 called the Minsk Protocol, which was signed by Russia, by the Ukraine, by France, by the European Union, by the United Nations Security Council, and I think Samantha Powers of the US wanted to endorse it at the time. All that needs to happen is that protocol needs to be applied. right? And basically it says, get the hell of your troops out of Ukraine, establish a buffer zone, and the Donbas region stays part of Ukraine, but it becomes a semi-autonomous region with a Russian-speaking language. That is the solution. It's inexistent. All that Biden has to do, if he's serious about this issue, is put pressure on the Ukrainian government to apply the agreement that was signed in 2015. But nobody is doing it. Ukraine is not going to join NATO. It is a fantasy. France will never allow it. Macron has already, he's not said it yet, but France is the head of the European Union at the moment. So Macron
Germany will never allow it either.
Yeah, and Serbia won't allow it. But Macron already said he wants to talk to Putin. I think on Friday he's speaking to Putin. So hopefully the French will bring diplomacy to the area, because let's face it, Germany doesn't have much of an army. Okay, it's going to be either the US and France. The US is half into the thing, and the UK, by the way, Boris Johnson is just warmongering because he wants to avoid responsibility for this f-ups during COVID. You know,
it's true. Well, also, okay, if I can jump in there, please, Claire. Also, Boris Johnson did really well during COVID. The UK really had Freedom Day in August. They had no restrictions from August to December. That put them in a good position to do very well economically. He personally and his cabinet and the party is another story. Well, look, inflation is pretty much everywhere that central banks went crazy. But let's not get too sidetracked. I agree with you that domestic political tensions are being solved by saber rattling with Russia. I just want to say one more thing about Minsk too. And this is a point that I think anyone who's watched this issue play out on BBC or CNN or read about it casually through like Anglosphere, Facebook world that I at least occupy here in South Africa would completely not understand. Most people whose news diet is coming from there, they think that what Putin wants is to take the Donbass out of Ukraine and put it into Russia, that he's like hungry for more territory. That is the opposite of what he wants. That is the opposite of what serves Russian realpolitik geostrategic interests. They want to keep the Donbass inside the Ukraine. Why? Because if it stays inside the Ukraine, then the Ukraine can never join NATO. Then the Ukraine cannot become a sort of race nationalist, anti-Russian, Ukrainian versus Russian kind of thing. Then it's got to be more federal, more multicultural, more multi-ethnic, more of a buffer zone. Yeah, ultimately Russia would prefer the whole of Ukraine to become a full-on Moscow satellite. But given that that's not on the table, they'd rather have the Donbass in there to spoil the party for those who want Ukraine, Kiev, to become a total EU, NATO, anti-Moscow satellite. And people who don't understand that and don't understand that there was a coup which rendered the Kiev's government illegitimate, which gave a reason for the Crimeans to seek independence, which gave Luhansk and Donetsk reason to seek independence, are not going to understand anything. They're just going to get stuck in the position where they think Russians are evil. It's the Cold War all over again. They're just colonial maniacs who want to take over as much land as they can. It's literally the opposite. They want the Donbass to stay in Ukraine. What's happening now, and I'll finish with this, that makes me the most worried. The single fact that's sort of like you basically have to read in Cyrillic to see this covered, maybe in French or whatever. But I'm not seeing this in my English media diet, is that the Russian parliament is discussing passing a vote on recognizing the Donbass as part of Russia. In other words, parliament might force Putin's hand. Now, if you look at the Russian parliament, Putin's party just lost its majority in 2021. So he's not in charge of the party that's in charge of most of parliament. The second biggest party is the Communist Party, which has very strange attitudes. The third biggest party is like a hardcore nationalist expansionist party, which maybe is guilty of the kind of thinking that's attributed to the Kremlin. So, you know, if there's a split in United Russia and those other parties all go for trying to recognize the Donbass as part of Russia, then there's going to be a very unfortunate situation where Putin's hand is forced. Because how can a president say, my parliament has said this is part of the country, but now I'm going to say no? He would basically force his own resignation if he did that. And I don't think he's going to do that. So that's something to watch out for. They were going to vote on it this week, but they postponed that until early February.
Absolutely. Just hang on, everybody. We're in the last 15 minutes of the show. Welcome to it. If you've just joined it, my name is Sihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty, in conversation tonight about the Ukraine and, of course, the geopolitics that we're seeing play out on the global stage between the Russians in one corner, represented by one Vladimir Putin, and, of course, Upra Joe, Sleepy Joe Biden himself, the president of the United States of America. Something something is going on here. Are we being dribbled? My panel, tonight, Chris Wyatt, of course, host of his own show out in the US, stuck in Maryland at the moment, trying to dodge them cops, them COVID grift cops with them mask mandates. Shout out to you, Chris. I see your struggle, homie. Gabriel Crouse from the Institute of Race Relations, someone who has a deep, well-read knowledge on Russian politics and also Russian history. Hugo Kruger, of course, my go-to for all things international news when it comes to analysis in that particular regard. Welcome to it. This is the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Fellas, I'm going to throw it to you because you've painted a picture here. For those of us who are novices to this issue, maybe who weren't even paying attention to it, maybe as South Africans, you've painted a very grim picture here where almost you've inverted things. You know, ordinarily we expect to hear, yes, the evil Russians, right? They're the ones who are the instigators of all of this, and the saber rattlers, as it were. I mean, I even began the segment by the usual rhetoric. The Russians are amassing troops at the border. They are the biggest threat. But here you guys are painting a picture that actually don't be dribbled. Joe Biden here actually is who you need to pay attention to. The sleight of hand, the shifting of things could actually be coming from him. Chris, I'll give you the bite of the apple in this regard. But in doing so, answer the question, why should this matter to South Africans, especially as we now look at assumingly from a South African government perspective, who to side with, the Russians or the Americans?
Answer the question. That's the name of my show with Rob Hutchison. I think you appropriated that. Anyway, but seriously. Well, answer the question. There's definitely a sleight of hand here. And why should South Africans care? Well, because it affects geopolitics. And quite frankly, I mean, I don't mean to scare people, and we probably aren't on a precipice of it, but we've got a leader who's trying to distract from his failures and clearly is causing trouble. And, it's with a nuclear armed nation. You can't have this kind of nonsense going on. They said the same thing about Trump. He's going to start wars, but Trump actually ended wars and tamped things down, whether you like Trump or not. He certainly did that. But let me just give an example why I think this is an issue that is just, distraction. First off, the United States currently has record numbers of people infected with the Rona. Whether you believe in it or not, whatever, that isn't germane. But the test results come in, I know Hugo doesn't believe the test. I don't really care. But whatever the case is, the number of people infected and currently sick with this are record. I mean, it hasn't been this high since a year ago. This is a complete failure by this administration, all its policies, and at many of the states, it's a failure. What has the United States done for the people of Tonga? We have the largest, most capable military command in Hawaii, Indo-Pacific Command, with ships, resources, water, food, helicopters, planes, everything to help these people in Tonga. And it's the Kiwis with 35 people in their military and the Australians who are too busy making their pilots wear masks to fly there who are doing something. This is a disgrace. The COVID's out of control. We're doing nothing there. And now a book comes out which once again reveals the high levels of corruption by Joe Biden, his pay-for-play access to our government at the highest levels with his despicable son, Hunter Biden, and the list goes on. So that new book came out by Peter Schweitzer yesterday, just released. There is distraction going on here. South Africans should care because the world is being destroyed by a corrupt elite in all of these countries, including South Africa, who have nothing. The only thing they have in common is self-enrichment and their egos. It is not the representation of people. The vast majority of people leading countries around the world is quite sad. And 36 and a half years supporting, defending our Constitution, protecting the liberties of Americans and people around the world. And I have to sit here and watch this disgusting spectacle roll out. Joe Biden is distracting from his failures. And even short of that, he's stupid. Let me tell you how unserious he is. We're doing nothing for Tonga. And nobody's asking that question in the press. Why is no one asking? Why is the United States? We always go. We went for tsunami relief in Thailand and Bali. We go everywhere when there's a disaster like this. That's why we have this capability. We're doing nothing. Nobody's in Tonga to help those people out. And the second thing is, if Joe Biden were taking this seriously, what is the name of Joe Biden's nominee for ambassador to the Ukraine? Oh, wait, guys, it's been over a year. He's yet to nominate someone. Hey, Joe, I'm available. I'll work for your corrupt regime and go to Ukraine. I know a lot about geopolitics in Russia. It's what I did as an undergraduate, studied Russia and read its literature for the last 40 years. So I'll be happy to go, Joe. He hasn't even nominated. He can't even blame the Republicans. Oh, they're holding up the nomination because he has not nominated an ambassador for Ukraine. That's how little this matters to Joe Biden. This is a complete distraction from his corrupt, inept, moronic, decrepit, shameful, and embarrassing regime. Case closed.
Guys, can I just quickly jump in here? Can we please not say anything about the spicy cough? I'm really sitting on quite a few strikes on my channel because of it. So can we avoid this topic completely? Hugo, I'm looking at you in particular. So can we avoid it? But I want us to stay on this one, Hugo, and I'm coming to you with this question with a slight pivot, perhaps, because there are bigger things at play here, and I will come back to you, Chris, with the same question. Joe Biden, guys, is under a lot of pressure. Anything and everything that he seems to have touched has not been the Midas touch. If anything, it's turned to absolute crap, and quite spectacularly so, including, by the way, his friends in the media and the corporate media in that part of the world, even beginning to an extent to turn on him. Now, let me ratchet it up a little bit in terms of the geopolitics international that Joe seems to be faltering on. We're talking a lot about Russia here, Russia. But in truth, there's another quote-unquote foe that the Americans are keeping an eye on, or maybe aren't at the moment under Sleepy Joe, the Chinese, who are also looking to make a move in a territorial dispute type manner. And they'll be watching Sleepy Joe quite vividly as to how he deals with this self-created Russia problem, Hugo.
Well, I mean, I tend to think the threat of China, I'm a bit in the middle between it, because it's a clear threat to Taiwan, it's a clear threat to Hong Kong. I don't think it's a threat to the American mainland particularly, and that there can also be a Chinese boogeyman sometimes. But the threat of China is this: the Chinese are lobbying the WHO to impose a social credit system on the rest of the world. That is this, quote unquote, coffee flu vaccine passport. Okay, that is a serious threat to human liberty, and there's been no sign that the Democratic Party is taking any stand against it. In terms of Russia, look, I was very critical of Trump. I supported Biden because I didn't like Trump, but Trump's one great thing in foreign policy was he wanted to establish good relationship with Russia. I don't see why that would be a bad thing, right? This is supported, by the way, by leftists such as Noam Chomsky. Okay, this is a cross-party thing actually in the United States. It's only a few isolated Democrats who don't support it. I saw a poll the other day: 1 in 6 American soldiers would want a war with Russia. Why? Because everyone gets it. You don't fight Russia in the winter. It's going to be self-destruction. It's a nuclear war. It's idiotic, right? It's completely idiotic. Also, there's spheres of influences. Now, whether you believe Ukraine is an autonomous country and they have a right to self-determination, that's great in theory. Guess what? If the Russians and the Chinese start arming the Mexicans, America's going to send their troops to Texas, right? This is the exact same thing that is going to happen at the moment. That's happening at the moment. You have to accept that Ukrainians, the best deal they can get is the Minsk II deal. The US just needs to put pressure on them and say, look, you signed it a few years ago, you agreed with the Russians, we're going to force you into it. And there's all signs on the continent that France is going to do it. Germany is screaming war as well. Their chancellor's an idiot because he wants to not accept responsibility for his F-ups. The French are not going to allow Ukraine into NATO. There's no ways that's going to happen, because the polls just showed me that 65% of the French don't want conflict with Russia. And without French support on the continent, you cannot get Ukraine into NATO. So forget about that dream. Just imply a Minsk II protocol and then stop using the Russian boogeyman as a threat, or as a distraction from your own domestic failures.
Absolutely. Chris, let me come back to you. Gabriel,
Can I follow up with a tiny...
In a moment. Okay. I promise I'll come back to you. This is a one-liner that I need from Chris in particular, because I wanted him to just chew on the China thing, and then I'll come to you to give us both. Gabriel. Chris, the China thing for me is, I hear Hugo's point to say that there's a little dribbling when it comes to China, but the Taiwanese would disagree. They'll say, hey man, we need we also need the 8,500 troops being placed on high alert. When it comes to the Chinese. These Chinese now are quite literally riding ships along our waters, flying the jets, pardon me, over our sovereign airspace. Where are our 8,500 troops that are going to be mobilized, or the US naval show of force on our shores?
I'm not sure what the question was, but is the question, what's the deal with China? What about Taiwan? I think he agrees. I don't want to misquote what he said, but I think he agrees that Taiwan is concerned. It's a real threat. China is a threat. It's just vis-a-vis whether China is going to do something in this situation with Russia. Unlikely. Russia has a bigger problem with China, which no one talks about, and that Russia is depopulated in the Far East. and that sitting next door in Siberia, or not Siberia, in Manchuria, and below that are 1.5 billion Chinese. They need somewhere to expand, and there's lots of territory. At some point in the not too distant future, Chinese are simply just going to cross the border, and the Russians won't be able to enforce. There's a real possibility of it. But Taiwan definitely has real concerns. We have betrayed Taiwan since 1979 under James Earl Carter, and it's a disgrace what's happened. And the Taiwanese have a real concern. The Chinese violate their airspace every single day. They fly bombers into the airspace of Taiwan. They put ships out there, but it's not just Taiwan. They continue to do this in the Sea of Japan, threatening Japan in particular all the time, and they also occasionally do it in South Korea. They are a menace. They are a troublemaker. They are sowing their oats, trying to see what they can get away with. And the United States, and I'm just reading it now, Schweitzer's book, I already know these answers, but he's confirming it with over 1,000 documented sources, that the Chinese, we've sold ourselves out to the Chinese. Our elites have sold us to the Chinese. That's why China's the power that it is. And Taiwan has a right to be concerned. Sleepy Joe is not going to defend Taiwan, despite his proclamations to the opposite. And I'll let Gabriel get in there because I could go for hours.
Absolutely. Gabriel, hit it home, dog.
Yeah, so so he has an interesting point about China. The German head of its naval forces, I think, is what he was in a seminar basically with India, and Germany and India are coordinating some naval stuff, and of course India has been joining the Big Four in that regard as well, and Germany's kind of trying to get in on that. And so he speaks for an hour. The video's on YouTube. And he's really talking about, he's asked lots of questions about China. He says China's acting as an enemy. It's going to be very important for freedom-loving countries to hold the line against China, and it's going to get harder and harder to do that. He then gets asked a question about Russia sort of 50 minutes into it, and he says that it would be a terrible mistake to engage in further hostilities with Russia over the Donbass. That there's a very low-cost way to deal with this, which I think in real terms is what Hugo's been referring to. He put it as this. He said, just pay some respect to Putin, and that he deserves that respect. And I'm quoting here, he deserves that respect because we need him. And we need Russia to contain China, to contain Beijing's China. We need Russia on side. It's a nightmare to have Russia selling hardcore military material to Iran, coordinating with China in all kinds of dodgy ways. And the reason Moscow is doing that is not because it's got a natural affinity with Beijing. It's doing that because it's being driven into the arms of the West's enemies by this kind of hostility. What happened to that German naval officer? He was forced to resign almost immediately. Okay, so he said, be nice to Russia so we can go after Beijing together. Zip. He was taken out. I think that gives some sense of where the new German coalition majority is at. There's a further point to be made there, which is, one of the things that would really reduce tensions is if the Germans, and there's nothing to stop them doing this but themselves, would just allow the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to open up. The Russians are frustrated the fact that the Ukrainians have been getting $1.5 billion, $2 billion a year through transit fees, because there's a Russian pipeline that goes from Russia into Europe through the Ukraine, and the Ukraine doesn't do anything, but they just get money in terms of the transit fee. And the Ukrainians are being hectically anti-Russian. They passed like a race ethno-test law. They've tried to ban the Russian language. They've taken it out of schools. They've taking arms from NATO countries in order to put down these Russian separatist movements. The Russians have a lot of reasons to be iffy with the Ukrainians, and so they don't want their pipe going through Ukraine anymore. They want to go around, and the Germans are blocking that. If they unblock that, it would be so great for Europe. It would bring the gas prices down. It would reduce some of the sort of supply chain issues that are being faced there, and it would definitely please Russia. That's why it's not being done. But part of the reason the Germans don't want to do it is because the coalition includes the Greens, who like all of this tension connected to gas and any tension connected to oil and whatever, because they hope that'll make Germans forget that they pay for the most expensive electricity in the world because they abandon nuclear energy on the most stupid basis with an actual PhD leader, which infuriates me.
Yep.
So anti-science. and have the most expensive electricity because it's being generated by like solar panels and wind.
It's being sold from France. We convinced them to
Yes,
get rid of the nuclear power, and then we just
in
said
a country with 3 sunny days a year.
Taps. Yes, you guys. So okay, but so they should open the taps, and they should get serious about where's the peer competitor to Washington.
I just want to say
NATO,
something.
What's the real threat, and do you want Russia with you or against you on that?
So just a slight disagreement, Gabriel. I don't think Nord Stream matters. Nord Stream, the Russians are actually losing money on Nord Stream at the moment, and the United States has now, I think last year, the year before, become the world's primary exporter of LNG gas. Europe is going to buy more gas from the USA. Even countries like Egypt is now importing gas. It might soon happen to Algeria. Russia, by the way, might import gas in the near future, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
Because it is just too far away for them to get it. They might actually consider buying it from the US. So America has geopolitical advantage already. What are you looking for trouble there? I mean, I quote John Mearsheimer on this, who said, look, the problem there is the West's fault. Okay, Obama helped instigate that coup d'etat in 2014. And I think the bigger issue is the transnational elite is totally detached from reality, because the Davos man makes move their factories to China, and they don't want to accept the reality that they are responsible for deindustrialization of the West. And the Western base has realized this. Now, I'm saying it's much easier for a base to get a new elite than for the elite to get a new base. Let's get rid of these clowns, okay, and replace them with people who have got a sensible thinking. I don't want to live in a society with a carbon credit score. And this is what they want to impose onto everyone here. And it's coming from the Chinese and this weird transnational elite. These are the guys we need to get rid of at the moment. And they are panicking because they know people are waking up. And this is why they're trying to ramp up tensions. They've got a very old mentality. I'm sorry, China did not get democratic when it got free markets. That thesis has been disproven. There's a higher chance of Russia becoming democratic than China becoming democratic at the moment. And the second thing is, this idea that Putin is a tyrant. Well, that is true. He locks up journalists, but so does Erdogan. Erdogan actually locked up more journalists than Putin does. He's part of NATO, right?
Yeah, journalists, military officers, professors, scientists, doctors, a fake coup that was not a coup precipitated by elements of his government to take out all the elites in the country. And they're still in prison. 70,000 people in Turkey.
Guys, I must end it here. We are completely out of time. As I always do, in the last sort of minute or so, just each of you, please, how do the folks get in touch with you? What are you working on? Very briefly. Chris, hit me, homie.
3 programs now I've got going regulars. Fireside with the Colonels, Wyatt and I fortnightly every 2 weeks on a Monday, proving to be very popular. Every Thursday with Rob Hutchison from DRSA called Answer the Question. We talk about politics and events in Southern Africa. And then I'll be starting a program next week called Kenako, the Call of Africa with Koketso Retsane, Dumadenga, and someone else. I'll be the pale skin in the group there. We'll be doing that every couple of weeks. That's coming up. And so keeping busy trying to overcome the shadow banning on the PooTube. And very quickly, just 2 thoughts before I let it go. Finlandization, embrace it, Ukraine. Finlandization, embrace it. Be a neutral power. Don't be involved in anything, and you'll be fine. You'll succeed. And the Russia and the United States have a moral and legal obligation to protect the sovereignty of Ukraine based on the agreement we signed in the early 1990s, which convinced Ukrainians to demobilize and break up their nuclear missiles. They did it, and we have an obligation to protect them, a treaty obligation, which we're following through on. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you very much. That is, of course, Chris Wyatt out in Maryland, the USA, on his way to a press conference. Shout out to Chris. Guys, before I just move on to the other 2, please hit that like button. Trust you me when I say it. It really helps the show avoid a certain thing that I can't even say anymore because I got a strike for saying it. Please hit that like button. Hugo, your final word, homie. How do the folks get in touch with you?
Okay, final word quickly. I see someone in the comments made a quick question about Germany and in energy. One thing we need to be critical of, our CSIR in South Africa and the University of Cape Town is being infiltrated by German scientists who want us to go renewable. It's completely idiotic.
Yeah.
Winnie Matashi was correct. I'm defending him today.
Yeah.
Let's get rid of those clowns. We want to have clean coal. Okay, that's just the first point. Second one, or we can get nuclear from France because I will work on it. Substack, I'm writing on Substack and I've got a channel on Odyssey. Okay, and on Substack, I've done a lot of coverage on the COVID-19 scandemic, and on Odyssey, I do very controversial topics. I was kicked off YouTube very quickly, so I didn't even bother with them. Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. That, of course, is Hugo Kruger, all the way out in France. Shout out to you, homie. Bring some frog legs next time. I can't eat them because they ain't kosher, but just bring them. Just enjoy. That's Hugo Kruger out in France. You'll see a lot more of Hugo, of course, on the show. I do see your comment, Brasem Monkwe, basically saying, hey, man, how about doing a long format thing, almost like Joe Rogan? That's what I do on Sundays with Liberty and Friends. And what I may do is invite these chaps back again on Sunday where we can unpack this and bring in other international issues that we should be paying attention to as South Africans on a much more longer format. That's the Sunday show, 8 p.m., Liberty and Friends. Gabriel Crouse, last but not least, who also, by the way, is the co-host of Two Crickets in a Thorn Tree. Homie, what's happening on your side? How do people get in touch with you? Pardon me?
I'm going to use this opportunity to punch back on one debating point. Russia has the largest reserve of gas in the world, and still Europe, 40% of Europe's gas comes from Russia, which is why I think that does matter. Okay, where you can find me is on the Daily Friend predominantly. I'm also the head of campaigns, where you should expect a piece about the Russian situation coming out, where a lot of these things will be written down if you want to sort of look at facts that people overlook. Most of what I spend my time doing is running campaigns at the Institute of Race Relations. We have been campaigning very hard against the vaccine mandates. Government trying to force people to make medical choices. It's just not right. I have bragged about, I don't know, I love listening to the Supreme Court of the United States proceedings, the way that they dealt with Biden's attempt to force 100 million American workers to get jabbed. I thought the court proceedings were really, really good. And anyway, we have to take that argument in a different way in South Africa. And the best way to take that argument forward is for people to sign up on our petition. We've got over 10,000 signatures. Join the team. Stand Up for Freedom. We've got over 20,000 signatures on our other petition, which is to disband the Command Council and end the state of disaster. The Command Council is the disaster. Okay, if you look at the COVID deaths, if you look at the COVID cases, that is clearly not disastrous. We have plenty of scientists who back that claim up. We've got legal experts who back our claims up. There's a better way to go. And with the Special Investigating Unit, just talking about 15 billion rand in irregular expenditure coming out through this disaster of the state of disaster. I think it's a special time for South Africans to pay attention. Your money's being wasted because under the state of disaster, scrutiny is not there. And it's not going to come back. Proper democracy is not going to come back until citizens say something about it. We try and channel that energy. Go to irr.org.za, sign up to our campaigns. We really appreciate the support. And we've got lots of South Africans already supporting us.
Absolutely. That is Gabriel Crouse, head of campaigns at the Institute of Race Relations, and of course, the co-host of Two Crickets in a Thorn Tree. Thank you very much to all the gentlemen as I just get them off screen. Shout out to Hugo there, lastly on our screen. And thank you, by the way, for watching. It's always a pleasure to have you on the BDL show. Remember, I'll see you again on Sunday evening at 8 p.m. for Liberty and Friends. That's the show where we have a panel that helps me wrap up the news week that was. That's much more of a long format show, between 90 minutes to 2 hours. So look out for it this Sunday, 8 p.m. Of course, if you missed this broadcast, you'll find it again on all my channels, whether it's on Twitter, YouTube, or on Facebook. So make sure you do that. Hit that like button on your way out, and please share the show if you really liked it. And if you really, really like the content, please consider supporting the channel. It's very simple. All of that information is in the descriptor of the video. People are pledging between 50 and 100 Rand a month. It really does help get me and my content out and about. With that being said, thank you so much for watching the show. I will see you on Sunday, as I mentioned. And remember, as I always say at the end of a show, never trust a commie.